This week's grammar review is something that we worked on all year, so hopefully this will be a really easy one for you, but I am going to add this skill onto the quiz this week at the end of the week. So this week's quiz will have semicolons, colons, dashes, parallel structure, commas, as well as questions about formatting titles and making sure that you're citing sources and quotes correctly. So this is a quick review. This slideshow is very similar to one that I showed you back in August, but I did want to refresh your memory a little bit on when to use italics and when to use quotation marks. So basically, the rule is if it's a longer work, you italicize it or underline it. And if it's a shorter work, you're going to use quotation marks around it. So the titles of books and plays are going to be italicized. The titles of newspapers are going to be italicized, whereas the titles of short stories, poems, and articles inside newspapers or magazines are going to have quotation marks around them. So The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is a longer work. It is a full book, so it is italicized here. The Crucible by Arthur Miller is a play. It is italicized here as well. Richard Cory is actually a poem. We read that in class first semester. So Richard Cory has quotation marks around it because it is a shorter work. This source is an article inside a newspaper. So the title of the article, How to Have a Successful Life, has quotation marks around it. The New York Times is the title of the newspaper. It is italicized. So let's talk about when you also use quotes from one of those types of sources. So when you're simply using a quote that has a period at the end, you will use quotation marks, and then your period will go inside the end quotation mark. Now, there is an exception to this rule. We'll talk about that a few slides down. When you're introducing a quote using a signal phrase, which you do a lot of times when you're introducing and adding evidence into your essays, make sure that you're using a comma after the signal phrase. As in this example, when talking to Connor, Sonia asks, comma, you think that makes me a saint? When you have a quote within a quote, this has come up several times this year as you've been writing essays. If the quote that you want to use has quotation marks in it, when you use that in your writing, take the quotes that are part of what you are including and turn those into single quotes. You can see in this example from Unwind, the sentence that I used from the text had quotation marks in it already, so that's why you see the 3 quotation marks at the beginning. I'll tell you something, love, is a quote inside what I have quoted here. So to indicate that, I've used a single quote around I'll tell you something, love, and then I've got the regular double quotes on the outside of the entire sentence. Okay, to add citations, there are 2 ways to do that. The first is signal phrases, which you saw in the previous examples, where you mention the author's name and or title of the work in the sentence. Most of you do a really good job with this in your writing already. So this is just a simple review. In Unwind, comma, make sure you italicize there. Sonia wisely states, comma, because we use that signal phrase, and then introduce your quote with a period inside the quotation marks at the very end. The other ways to cite sources in the text is parenthetically. So you know this, that the author's name and the page number, if applicable, should go in parentheses immediately following the quote. This is the exception to the rule of the period going inside the quotation marks. If you have a parenthetical citation, the period goes after the citation. Now, some of you have lost several points on data analysis packets because you haven't been doing the parenthetical citations the right way. So pay close attention here and make sure that when you are using parenthetical citations, you're using the correct format. You don't have the period before the quotes. You have the quotation marks, then your parentheses, last name, page number, close parentheses, then period. When you're writing your essay for EOC, You will need to cite your sources, which are provided for you in the test itself, in the form of articles or stories or whatever they are. Cite them either using signal phrases in article such and so says, or parenthetically. Or you could do both, but you've got to do something to indicate where the quotes are coming from. So keep that in mind. Again, this is just reiterating that the period always goes after the quotation marks, or sorry, not after the quotation marks, forgive me, after the parentheses when you're using a parenthetical citation. So I said, Sonia states, people aren't all good, people aren't all bad, we move in and out of darkness and light all of our lives. Close your quotes, parentheses, Shusterman 111, close parentheses, then the period. Some of you have done that wrong on your data analysis all year. So let's fix it. If by chance you have a quote that ends in a question mark, this is an exception, you leave the question mark before the closing quotations, then you do your parenthetical citation, then also a period at the end to indicate that that's the end of the quote. So that's the end of this week's review on using correct format for titles and correctly incorporating quotes into your writing. So keep all of these things in mind when you are preparing for this week's quiz and as we get closer and closer to EOC.